Let's give it up for Dalton.
In the beginning, it started with a story. Throughout all of history, communities, peoples, nations, and history itself have been shaped by our collective experiences and personal stories. Stories have been used for good. They've also been used for evil. Stories tell us where we're going, and they also tell us where we've been. In a 5-minute presentation, I don't have the time or the ability to discuss the history of global storytelling, but what I do want to share with you is how sharing our personal experiences can shape the American story. First off, stories bring hope. As I recently walked through the halls of Ellis Island, I saw the story that Americans once tried to tell of ourselves, a place of opportunity, hope, and a story that anyone from anywhere could achieve the American dream. The story of what America could be was painted by those who lived it firsthand. Now, while in some circles, rhetoric has sought to alter this uniquely American ideal, I still believe that this stands strong today. Now, one of the stories that sticks with me is the stories of the Williams and the Wrights, President Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson's private cooks. When it was then Congressman Johnson, went from Washington, D.C. to Austin, Texas, he asked the Williams and the Wrights to take little Beagle Johnson, Johnson's dog, with them. Now, the stories of the Williams, he was able to talk to Congressman Johnson about facing segregation in the South when he didn't even have a place to go to the restroom when he was traveling through. It was in telling his story that President Johnson credits as his awakening to discrimination, and in turn allowed him to pass landmark civil rights legislation. Now, we don't have time to discuss the hundreds of stories of individuals that use their personal story to change the course of history. Now, it's also no secret that our country is divided. But I would contend that's not our policy differences, who we voted for in 2016, or any political label. I would contend that's our lack of a collective identity, our lack of a collective shared purpose. In his book, Them, Senator Ben Sasse discusses the nation's increasing polarization. So he highlights the modern storyteller, the medium for a storyteller, the TV, in which he says in 1950, 70% of Americans tuned in for the premiere of I Love Lucy. Just 30 years later, 54% of Americans tuned in for the series finale of MASH. And in 2019, just 4% of Americans tuned in to the series finale of HBO's Game of Thrones. Meanwhile, conservatives tune into Fox, liberals MSNBC, and most Americans are turning off the circus altogether. With so many choices and so many options, where do we even begin? Now, I believe that we begin here at a micro level by telling our personal stories. One thing it seems that both sides can agree on is that Americans are more lonely and isolated than ever. NBC News reported in 2019 that 1 in 4 Americans have no confidant in which they can share meaningful life experiences. So we're isolated, we're lonely, and we're divided. How do we heal a nation when that's our starting block? Again, I believe it comes from a place of vulnerability, and an inspiration to me is Brene Brown. And in her talk, The Power of Vulnerability, she says that the irony is that we attempt to disown our difficult stories to appear more whole or more acceptable. But our wholeness, even our wholeheartedness, actually depends on the integration of all of our experiences. Now, for me, it is very personal. If you would have met the Dalton 10 years ago, it would not be the Dalton standing before you today. I was the master at storytelling, but I did so to divide, to cast aside, and to hide, because the truth was, I wasn't telling who I really was. Now, fast forward to September 2015, in front of a room of 100 of my fraternity brothers, I told my story for the first time. The story of me coming to terms with my sexuality and my decision to embrace who God made me to be, a gay man. Since then, I've attempted to use that story to change political discourse in my party, in this community, and hopefully, in turn, in the nation as well. I believe through showing vulnerability, we can curb the feelings of isolationism, loneliness, and also get together to connect into a larger community, find a community that we can believe in, and then in turn bring that to a national level as well. Telling our stories can help forge a national identity. They can change a community, or they can simply change ourselves. And I believe that we need to, again, bring back in politics the ability to see each other's humanity first, dream second, and somewhere much further down the line, if at all, our political differences. So let's again recapture the art of telling our story, being vulnerable, with the mission and vision to heal a nation and change the world. Thanks so much.